there are a lot of people who are really upset, that the church is closed. People from my own church are upset. People from around the Bay Area are upset. Kind of everyone's upset. And you, when we talked last, your church is actually kind of like thriving through this. And it's kind of ushered in a new era that, I'm going to let you explain it, because you could explain it better than I can. But so you're the pastor of a church that you planted down in Ventura. So how has your church kind of adapted to basically a ban on gatherings?
Well, I promise I will answer your question, but could I backstep just a little bit?
Absolutely.
To bring a bit of context for even how we as a local leadership team would interpret and process through some of the changes that we've all had to process through in 2020. And I credit this to a friend of mine, a mentor, kind of draws on a whiteboard. I know this is a podcast, so this is the wrong medium, but on a whiteboard like a kind of a baseball diamond. And he will kind of go, right? First base is theology. Second base is philosophy. Third base is practice, and fourth base is leaders. And he'll go through and unpack them. Theology is what we believe about God. Philosophy is how do we then view the world and interpret that in our context. Practice is the things we actually do, and leaders are people who are running this engine. And what he would say is we get into trouble when we go backwards around the bases. So when we start at home plate, we start at home plate anyway, but when you go to third base first and you talk practice, and then you go talk philosophy, and then you talk theology. And in our particular context as a local church, we find that we make the best decisions when we actually start with what do we believe about God? What do we believe about Jesus? What do we believe about the church? And then what are the decisions we make after those things? And so right up top, one of the things that we've had to do in our local city and our local context, but with also friends as well, is to immediately correct the wrong thinking that the church is somehow closed because we can't gather the same way we used to. So start with theology. What do we believe about God? Do we believe he's more or less powerful than a global pandemic? What do we believe about the church? Do we believe the church is the Sunday gathering, or is that one practice that the church has had for part of its history? And for us, we would say the church has never closed. It never can, it never will be closed. Jesus opened the doors to his church, and he's the one who gets to close the doors on his church. Nobody else, not a pandemic, not government regulation, not anything. Now, does that require some interpretation? Absolutely. Does it challenge a model that we've maybe been handed or maybe we are accustomed to or used to? 100%. But that has to go after what do we believe about God and what do we believe about the church? Has the church closed? Absolutely not. Are we having to change practice and philosophy? Yes, absolutely. And so for us, as we kind of look through that lens, we know that we have to change and adapt with culture. And that means holding on with a closed fist, the things we believe about God, the things we believe about Holy Scripture, and not moving on those, the gospel message of Jesus Christ, but also being really open-handed with methods and methodology. And often the resistance and the conflict, at least inside the church, comes when Christians, those who would call themselves Christians, hold really close and close-handed methods and methodology, which just over 2,000 years of church history has changed. It has necessarily changed to meet every time, every moment, every culture. And that's one of the things I actually love about the church is it's beautifully resilient to culture, beautifully resilient to political persuasion. I mean, the church has thrived and flourished under communist China and persecution and some of the most liberalized, open, democratic governments that we've seen, and everywhere in between. And I would also say maybe one more addendum to that is actually if we look in 2,000 some odd years of church history, the church has actually thrived when it's not been in power. And the church has actually thrived when it's been the object of persecution or social ostracization or anything like that. And the church has actually gotten itself into trouble when they're the ones that are in power, that they're the majority, that they have the say, and they're wielding authority over others. So for us, that's all to say, we've actually looked at 2020 with great tenderness and gentleness for the people who are hurting, who have been affected by this either economically with job loss or an actual sickness and people we know who've had to struggle through COVID and all of that. we've actually looked at this year quite opportunistically, and trying to answer the question, like, how might God have us live differently? Is there a different version of the church that we could step into? Are there different habits and practices and patterns in our lives that we can embrace that actually help us come out of this season stronger, not weaker? More thriving, not just surviving, and more mature, not immature. And so for us, that's all context to say, like, this has been a hard year. Yes, it's been chaotic and confusing and crazy, but we've also tried to look at, like, what can we do and how can we respond to a God that we believe in is all powerful and loves to take the hard moments in our life and shape them for good. How can we actually respond in a way that's better? And then we actually come out of the year stronger and better, not in spite of, but because of some of the hard things we've had to walk through. So to your question earlier, we have totally upended our church and what it looks like and the format and the method, while holding close-handedly to the gospel of Jesus Christ. We have had to be open-handed with methods around gathering, methods around communication, methods around in-person and digital, and all of those different things. And for us, it was scary and crazy until the moment we said, God, we want to listen to the things that you're doing. And we want to be really open-handed with things we should be open-handed with, like how we gather, which has changed frequently and is quite different depending on your denominational heritage as well. And so it's silly for us to hold on to those because just 1 or 2 or 300 years before, let alone thousands of years before, these things have had to look different to meet the moment of culture.